Hey, so my name is Theo Watson, and I'm here at the Art Hack at 319 Skulls, and this is a little prototype of something called Connect Russian Roulette, and maybe you can guess what it does. So yeah, you have like a 1 in 8 chance or 1 in 6 chance of blowing your head off.
Hello? Hello?
So this is, I should say, not officially endorsed by Microsoft in any way. And this is not advocating anything that you should try and do.
Yeah. Okay. Email it where?
Come on.
Email. Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. The win the video. Okay.
Alright, that's it. That's me from a Art Hack Day.
Hey everybody, I'm Sven, and I will give you your lecture today. First of all, most of the people here from DT know who I am. If you're not from DT, you don't. So I'm a professor here at Parsons. I've worked in design and technology and in other areas for a long time, more than 20 years. And recently, I've participated in this lecture that Clive does, Designed for This Century. This year, unfortunately, I wasn't able to handle one of the recitations because I had a conflict with a different class, and lo and behold, my scheduled lecture conflicted with a trip I'm making or am on right now in China. So I'm sending this to you via videotape. I am coming at you from the front porch of my pink house in Greenpoint. I don't think it'll all be from the front porch, but I want to make a couple comments about the video before we dive in. I am not a professional videographer. This is not a high quality production. Please forgive any mistakes. There will be many. The point here is to introduce a number of thinkers, theorists, artists, technologists who I think are important, and even more fundamentally, to get the discussion going in the recitation. I very much agree with Clive's theme for the class, that being the design of the artificial on a number of levels, and it very much zeroes right in on the kinds of things I'll be talking about today. I just got back from doing Pilates, so if I turn up in a different shirt, it means I've showered and changed. It's not entirely to entertain you. But of course, if you want to do Pilates or yoga or even strenuous calisthenics during this lecture, you are welcome to do so. I can't see you. The main thing is I don't want you to get bored. So, well, first off, let me show you some quick shots of my house. I like my house. So, this is my pink house on Norman Avenue in Brooklyn. I won't spend much time on it, but this is my balcony, one of my favorite places. I might film a scene from there. I've got a front yard, which is very nice. Here is my yellow table, complete with one of my bonsai plants. Maybe I'll film a scene from here. And going further out towards the street is my vegetable garden, where I grow tomatoes and jalapeno peppers. Here are some of my very large jalapeno plants. Anyone who wants hot peppers, they can have them. I grow way too many, so just ask me for them.
What technology can we really apply to reducing global poverty? And what I found was quite surprising. We started looking at things like death rates in the 20th century, how they'd been improved. And very simple things turned out, you'd think maybe antibiotics made more difference than clean water, but it's actually the opposite. And so very simple things, off-the-shelf technologies that we could find easily on the then early web would clearly make a huge difference to that problem. But I also, in looking at more powerful technologies and nanotechnology and genetic engineering and other new emerging kind of digital technologies, became very concerned about the potential for abuse. If you think about it in history, a long, long time ago, we dealt with the problem of an individual abusing another individual. We came with something, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. That's a kind of a one-on-one thing. We organized into cities. We had many people, and to keep the many from tyrannizing the one, we came up with concepts like individual liberty. And then to have to deal with large groups, say at the nation-state level, and we had to have mutual non-aggression, or through a series of conflicts, we eventually came to a rough international bargain to largely keep the peace. But now we have a new situation, really what people call an asymmetric situation, where technology is so powerful that it extends beyond a nation state. It's not the nation states that have potential access to mass destruction, but individuals. And this is a consequence of the fact that these new technologies tend to be digital. We saw genome sequences. You can download the gene sequences of pathogens off the internet if you want to, and clearly someone recently, I saw in a science magazine, they said, well, the 1918 flu is too dangerous to FedEx around. If people want to use it in their labs for working on research, just reconstruct it yourself. So, because it might break in FedEx. So that this is possible to do this is not deniable. So individuals and small groups super empowered by access to these kind of self-replicating technologies, whether it be biological or other, are clearly a danger in our world. And the danger is that they can cause roughly what's a pandemic. And we really don't have experience with pandemics. And we're also not very good as a society at acting to things we don't have direct and sort of gut level experience with. So it's not our nature. It's not in our nature to pre-act. And in this case, more piling on more technology doesn't solve the problem, because it only super empowers people more. So the solution has to be, as people like Russell and Einstein and others imagined in a conversation that existed in a much stronger form, I think, early in the 20th century, that the solution had to be not just the head but the heart, public policy and moral progress. The bargain that gives us civilization is a bargain to not use power. We get our individual rights by society protecting us from others, not doing everything they can do, but largely doing only what is legal. And so to limit the danger of these new things, we have to limit ultimately the ability of individuals to have access essentially to pandemic power. And we also have to have sensible defense, because no limitation is going to prevent a crazy person from doing something. But and the troubling thing is that it's much easier to do something bad than to defend against all possible bad things. So the offensive uses really have an asymmetric advantage. So these are the kind of thoughts I was thinking in 1999 and 2000, and my friends told me I was getting really depressed and they were really worried about me. And then I signed a book contract to write more gloomy thoughts about this, and moved into a hotel room in New York with one room full of books on the plague, and nuclear bombs exploding in New York, where I would be within the circle, and so on. And then I was there on September 11th. And I stood in the streets with everyone, and it was quite an experience to be there. I got up the next morning and walked out of the city, and all the sanitation trucks were parked on Houston Street, ready to go down and start taking the rubble away. And I walked down the middle up to the train station, and everything below 14th Street was closed. It was quite a compelling experience, but not really, I suppose, a surprise to someone who'd had this room full of the books. It was always a surprise that it happened then and there, but it wasn't a surprise that it happened at all. And everybody then started writing about this. Thousands of people started writing about this. And I eventually abandoned the book. And Chris called me to talk at the conference, I said, I really don't talk about this anymore because, there's enough frustrating and depressing things going on. But I agreed to come and say a few things about this. And I would say that, we can't give up the rule of law to fight an asymmetric threat, which is what we seem to be doing because of the people that are in power, because that's to give up the thing that makes civilization. And we can't fight the threat in the kind of stupid way we're doing, because $1 million act causes $1 billion of damage, causes $1 trillion response, which is largely ineffective and arguably, probably almost certainly has made the problem worse. So we can't fight the thing with 1 million to 1 cost, 1 to 1 million cost benefit ratio.
So the topic of my lecture today is technology and honesty. Really, a subtitle ought to be your relationship with technology. What do you think about it? What are the things you're interested in? I use the word honesty. It's one of my favorite words when it comes to the creative process, partly because technology is so complicated in our lives today. And I think too often, whether we're simply using technology or working with it, we don't really come to grips with what we really think about it. It can give us great joy. It can cause great frustration. But it's important as artists and designers that we really zero in on both what we are most interested in, but also what our thoughts are about what the possibilities are with technology and with many of its implications. So technology and honesty, that's the general theme of the lecture. To give you a little bit of history, I think a program like Design and Technology, and certainly I believe this applies to design studies and transdisciplinary design as well, has gone through and will go through additional evolutions as we look at the relationship with technology. For DT, when we started out in the early, mid to late 90s, I should say, it's always tempting to give programs credit for more longevity than they actually have. The underlying thrust of the program in those days was really just simply getting involved. The web was new and bright. This was really pre-.com. Everybody wanted to learn about this new technology and get involved. Certainly for a lot of students it was about career, it was about job opportunities, but it was also curiosity, and this amazing, fantastic, quick-moving thing was going on. The .com rise and fall came and went. I think there was a period of time when a lot of students found themselves in the program with what I would describe, to be blunt, as a more gratuitous attitude towards technology. My view of this, I'll explain this a little bit. My view of this came from an interaction I had with my wife, Louisa Campbell, who is also a teacher in the program. Some of you will at some point probably study with her. She teaches research and writing in the DT thesis process. She's also involved in a number of media and education research initiatives, Digiteration with Catherine Moore-Walkie, and she teaches Designing Education, another class within DT that is in fact openly available to all grad students at Parsons and the university. Louisa works most directly with the writing that the thesis students are doing in the DT thesis process. And one day I was sitting at home and Louisa came out of her office and was quite pissed off, pardon my language. She had a stack of thesis documents in front of her, and she just came out and said, look, you know, I'm fed up with what seems to be the decision-making process with these students in terms of what they're doing, how they're interacting with technology, what they're using for their projects, what they're using to build things. It almost seems gratuitous, like they're in a program that has technology in the name and somehow they feel the need to use it, and so they just are grasping for straws. Well, I got very interested in this idea, and I actually think it's very representative of sort of the middle era of DT. I don't want to suggest for a moment that most people aren't enrolled and involved in DT because of their deep interest in working with technology and becoming meaningful creative technologists. But I do think there was a period of time when there was a lack of focus, a lack of vision about exactly what the technology meant in the world and why we were using it. And I think Louisa was right on, that there were times when students weren't really arriving at conclusions about what was most interesting to them, why they were building a particular thing. And they were just sticking technology in, sometimes I think because they felt they had to. I think we've become better, partly through lectures like this, not the one I'm giving, but the one in general that Clive gives, at thinking about technology, thinking about what design means in general. The whole idea of the artificial, which you'll come back to time and time again within this lecture, is a great example of that. It's impossible to look at the artificial without really looking at the role of technology in our lives. And I think we're doing a much better job of that. But I think there's one other thing that has happened as this evolution has continued, and that is the onset of reality and fear. And here I'm able to segue back into why I play Bill Joy to start things off. Bill is a consummate technologist, one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, one of the inventors of the Java programming language. More recently, he's gone into venture capital, working at Kleiner Perkins out in Silicon Valley, among other places. But this is a guy who is an influencer at the most basic core of what's happened to us over the last 20 years. And he's a guy who a lot of people view as a pessimist. He has repeatedly expressed his concern about the way technology is used, the possibility of terrible, even horrific things happening if it gets into the wrong hands. And some of his thoughts, although I would not want to represent him entirely as a pessimist, are really chilling. Bill was the author of a now very famous article in Wired magazine that was published several years ago called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." By the way, everything I mentioned today, the authors, the books, the videos that I play within this broader video, and any other links I bring up will be available on the Design for This Century site. And let me make a slight aside here and comment to you that yes, you'll have noticed that Fabiola is videotaping this lecture. We do make the videos of the lectures available along with the PowerPoints of the lectures and any other material or content that the lecturers, be they Clive or guest lecturers that he has in, feel are important. So in this case, I will provide you a link to the article Bill wrote in Wired magazine, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us. I played Bill Joy's video to start things off because the more I'm involved in technology, the more my unbridled enthusiasm is tempered by concern about different implications going on around us. And really I wanted to start this whole lecture on this point simply to demonstrate that I think as we discuss these issues, there really is a full circle. I think we have to talk about whether we embrace technology at all in our lives. One of the thinkers, writers that I'll talk about today, very soon actually, is a guy named Matthew Crawford, who wrote a wonderful article in the New Atlantis called Shopcraft as Soul Craft. Before you wonder why I'm not going back and editing all of this, when I make a lot of mistakes in my speech, I just think it's more natural and better not to do it. I guess I could try to polish it all up, but as I said to start out with, I don't think that would end up with a better lecture. So forgive any mistakes I make, and I'll just lecture as though I'm lecturing. In any case, Shop Class as Soul Craft is Crawford's article, and you know, he talks a lot there about the notion of manual labor. I'll get to that in a minute. Going back to the notion of the pros and cons of technology, we've got to look hard at what it means. I'm going to bring up two other recent examples right now. The first one, they're both very familiar to you, but they're also very current, and we simply have to talk about them. We have to look at them as examples of technology in our lives and the implications of what is going on with technology. The first is Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks. I was able, during one recitation section a couple of years ago, I actually think Clive was present there, to bring up WikiLeaks as the topic for discussion one session, primarily because it had just blown up and it was everywhere, and I was able to walk into the recitation without any prompting, say to people, what is the most interesting thing that has happened during this past week? And just immediately people responded, WikiLeaks, WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was everywhere. And at that point, Bradley Manning was an unknown person. He's not anymore. He's been convicted. He is now serving a sentence of 35 years. He's announced he wants to be known as Chelsea, which has prompted a whole different debate about his situation. But we have to look at Bradley. We have to look at WikiLeaks. We have to look at what the implications are. More recently, Snowden, now in Russia, having been granted asylum to Russia. The NSA scandal, you really have to call it a scandal, and what is going on there. Both of these cases, just unbelievable, I think, to most of us. And, you know, we do have people amongst us, professors in particular, but certainly students amongst you who could be said to be far more aware of this kind of thing. You'll probably hear later in the semester from Ted Byfield, who is on top of this stuff and actually has written to the DT list a number of very insightful emails about, the fact that the New York Times, for instance, in the Snowden/NSA case, has been actually very reticent to publish information about this case. I've been fascinated in the Snowden case to watch the relationship develop between Snowden and the journalists who who released or made public his revelations through The Guardian in England and the increasing pressure that they've been under. Once again, I'll provide links to a Times article and some other interesting reading about these cases. Why do I bring all of this up to start with before even talking about any of the readings that I've asked you to look at? These cases, from Bill Joy's pessimism to recent privacy issues, the WikiLeaks, the Snowden releases, these are fundamental examples of things we have to be thinking about. We have to be forming opinions about how these issues are going to affect our lives, and more specifically, what they mean in relation to our role as creative thinkers, as researchers, as writers, as designers, as artists. Hi, I promised I would get you up to my balcony, and I have. Let's talk about Matthew Crawford. This is the man who wrote one of the assigned readings, Shop Class as Soulcraft. Why have I assigned this? You might ask, what does this have to do with the discussion on technology? Here, this guy is talking about manual labor and its importance to us. Well, that's exactly it. He's talking about fulfillment through manual labor. He's talking about our tendency to move away from said. And for me, as later on I bring up Ray Kurzweil, who has spent a lot of time dealing with artificial intelligence and the mapping of the human brain, I see some of Crawford's ideas as very, very relevant to helping us evaluate our own basic behavior. Crawford is an interesting guy. He is in fact a motorcycle mechanic and at times has run his own motorcycle repair shop. However, he's also an intellectual and has held posts both at universities. Currently, I think he's got a research post at a think tank. Always nice. He did turn this essay into a full-length book. But, you know, the essay pretty much covers all the important points. It's really fun to read, and I think there are elements in it that we will all identify with. This is one of the readings that, from my experience, has prompted the most wide-ranging discussion in the Design for This Century recitation over the past few years. So, regardless of whether you think it ties directly in to the other readings I've given, I would urge you to consider it carefully. From my end, I know a lot of what Crawford says is true. I may have a fascination with, say, computer programming. I may live at times the life of the mind. But I often find the greatest fulfillment from working on my bicycle or other kinds of things which wouldn't necessarily be considered intellectually advanced. Why is this? I don't know, but it's certainly part of the equation and we have to discuss it. I quote from Crawford. I once accidentally dropped a feeler gauge down into the crankcase of a Kawasaki Ninja that was practically brand new while performing its first scheduled valve adjustment. I escaped a complete teardown of the motor only through an operation that involved the use of a stethoscope, another pair of trusted hands, and the sort of concentration we associate with a bomb squad. When I finally laid my fingers on that feeler gauge, I felt as if I had cheated death. I don't remember ever feeling so alive as in the hours that followed. As an ode to Matthew Crawford, I will film this next section in front of two of my way too many bicycles. Before I go on with the assigned readings, I want to take a moment and talk about another thinker who I think is very important to all of us when we're talking about human behavior. And this is the theorist and researcher Howard Gardner. Gardner is responsible for coming up with the theory of multiple intelligences, which is widely embraced in a variety of educational studies. Gardner, from the start of his career as a psychologist and an educator, strongly believed that we were limiting our perception of the human consciousness if we were only evaluating people by verbal and mathematical means. So he went on to develop this theory of multiple intelligences, and now, probably 30 years later after it was first emerged, it has become very, very important to the kind of work a lot of designers do when they're dealing with human-computer interface. Gardner is active up at Harvard. He's been a Harvard professor for decades, has his own research institute there, and is someone you really ought to turn to and look at, if not only if you're interested in education, but also if you're just simply interested in how humans interact with things. The kinds of intelligences that he looks at: linguistic, musical, logical mathematical, spatial, body kinesthetic, interpersonal, interpersonal. And he has a whole series of subsets that go out of there. Gardner has written several books. Probably the most famous of his books is called Frames of Mind, The Theory of Multiple Intelligences. But he's a very active and prolific writer. And if you're interested in the way humans think, the way they learn, what's wrong with our modern education system, and fundamentally to this talk, how we might or might not more effectively interact with technology, Gardner is definitely worth looking at.
Well, by 2020 we'll have computers that are powerful enough to simulate the human brain, but we won't be finished yet with reverse engineering the human brain and understanding its methods. One of my main themes, and I've developed this thesis over 30 years, is that information technology grows exponentially. The power of computers, our understanding of the human brain, the spatial resolution of brain scanning, the number of bits we move around the internet. I mean, many different measures of information technology double every 1 year, every 11 months, 13 months, depending on what you're measuring. So these technologies will be 1 million times more powerful within 20 years. 20 years. In fact, the speed of exponential growth is itself speeding up. So in 25 years, these technologies will be 1 billion times more powerful than they are today. And we've already seen that kind of progress. When I was an undergraduate, we all shared a computer at MIT that took up half a building. The computer on your cell phone today is 1 million times cheaper and 1,000 times more powerful. That's a billion-fold increase in price performance of computing since I was an undergraduate. By 2029, and I've been quite consistent on this date, we will have completed the reverse engineering of the human brain. And we've already made very good progress on that. We've reverse engineered a number of different regions, like the cerebellum, which is responsible for our skill formation, and slices of the cerebral cortex where we do our recursive thinking, and the auditory cortex, the visual cortex, and so on. By 2029, we'll have reverse engineered and modeled and simulated all the regions of the brain, and that will provide us the software, algorithmic methods to simulate, all of the human brain's capabilities, including our emotional intelligence. And computers at that time will be far more powerful than the human brain. And we'll be able to create machines that really do have the subtlety and suppleness of human intelligence. And they'll combine that power with ways in which machines are already superior to us. They can harness all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. It can remember billions of things accurately. They can share knowledge at electronic speeds that are a million times faster than human language. So it'll be a very powerful combination. But the last point I'll make is that it's not some alien invasion of intelligent machines coming from Mars to invade us. It's coming from within our civilization, and the whole point of it is to extend our reach. Ever since we picked up a stick to reach a higher branch, we've used our tools to extend our reach. We can now already extend our reach mentally. I can take out a device from my pocket and access all of human knowledge with a few keystrokes. Half the farmers in China have these devices and can do the same thing. It is spawning a real cultural revolution in China and around the world, and these tools are continuing to grow exponentially in power. The singularity is not just that point where we achieve human level of intelligence in a machine. I mean, that will start a new revolution where these machines will continue to grow exponentially in power. They'll be able to actually improve their own software design. By 2045, we'll have expanded the intelligence of our human-machine civilization a billion-fold. That will be a singularity. And we borrowed this metaphor from physics to talk about an event horizon that's hard to see beyond. Well, it's not the case that I'm only looking at the optimistic side. I mean, I am an optimist, and I do think we've been helped more than we've been hurt by technology already. Human life expectancy was 37 in 1800, and human life was very hard, disaster-prone, labor-filled, disease-filled, and so on. But I've actually written extensively about the dangers of all this. Bill Joy's article on the cover of Wired magazine, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us, which talked about the grave dangers of genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics, came from my book. He says at the beginning of the article he got these ideas from my book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. And chapter 8 of The Singularity is Near is called The Deeply Intertwined Promise versus Peril of GNR, Genetics, Nanotechnology, and Robotics. I'm working extensively with the Army to develop a rapid response system to deal with the possible abuse of biotechnology. So about the same technologies that are empowering us to reprogram biology away from cancer and heart disease could also be used by a bioterrorist to reprogram a biological virus to be more deadly or more communicable. And the good news is we actually have the scientific tools to defend ourselves, just like we defend ourselves from software viruses with a rapid response system. And we need to put a system like that in place. But it's not accurate to say that I'm only painting a rosy future and that I have a utopian vision. My vision's not utopian. The power of these technologies will grow exponentially. I believe that is inexorable. That has gone on for the last 110 years since the 1890 census. What we do with these technologies is not preordained. That future history has not been written. I am very concerned about the downsides. I've written extensively about them, and in fact I'm working on defending against those. I am optimistic that we will get more promise than peril, but they both exist. Technology has been a double-edged sword ever since fire and stone tools. Well, I've been very active in talking about the downside of technology, and there are dangers. A danger we face right now is the ability for a bioterrorist to use our biological sciences to reprogram a biological virus to be deadly or communicable. And we have the ideas to combat that, but they're not yet in place. And so I think that's an existential risk we need to deal with very quickly. There'll be new dangers from these new technologies. I mean, I'm optimistic, but not sanguine. And I'm not necessarily convinced that we won't encounter painful episodes. I think overall we'll be helped more than we're hurt. But I mean, you only have to look at the 20th century. We had 180 million people die in the wars of the 20th century. That scale of destruction was made possible by technology. We've also helped ourselves enormously, because human life expectancy was 48 in 1900. So we need to address these dangers and downsides. I mean, that's what worries me.
Meet Ray Kurzweil, who over many years has been a favorite lecture topic of mine. Kurzweil is a computer scientist long situated up at MIT, although that has changed. I'll bring this up in a minute. He works primarily, or has worked primarily, in the area of artificial intelligence, but he is also known as an inventor. And in fact, most of you have seen products that he has invented. At your recent clubbing episodes or perhaps concerts, you have certainly laid eyes on Kurzweil synthesizers, an early invention when he was still a young man. He has also worked extensively in assistive technology, translation for the blind and deaf, and continues to do work of this nature. Kurzweil, by the public, is probably known most as a futurist and a writer, sometimes making predictions that seem outlandish, and some probably are, but he is an unbridled optimist when it comes to the possibilities that technology offers. Recently, he founded a new university called the Singularity University, which had the primary intention of attempting to attract the best and the brightest technologists working today. And this was not a joke. One of the things Kurzweil is not is some new age crack, or crackpot, I should say. He is highly respected. And when he put together this idea for a university and sold it in front of the Silicon Valley executives he has close contact with, he came up with the funding to do it. Singularity University is still in place, and in fact, any of you could go out there for a session. We've had a number of DT students who've been invited out and have attended week or 2 week sessions at Singularity University. Perhaps most interesting and most important, Kurzweil has just been named Director of Engineering at Google. I was shocked when I heard this news. Not because I haven't had respect for Kurzweil or a belief that Google has the capacity to do big things, certainly with their stream of money coming in, but that the two had connected in this way was pretty interesting. It both validated a lot of Kurzweil's ideas, while at the same time placing a very interesting spin on where Google sees the future going. So one of the things that Kurzweil has zeroed right in on is what is humanity's future. And this is a big part of the reason I bring it up in this lecture related to design for this century and design of the artificial. He strongly believes that human evolution is now directly tied in to that of digital evolution. What does it mean to be human in the future? To Kurzweil, it means, whether from a digital perspective or a biological perspective, we are going to be so linked with technology that there is, in a sense, no turning back. We will not be able to extricate our human genes from those of the technology. So this brings up a lot of interesting questions, some of them ethical in nature. What does it mean when we are designing what it means to be human? And we're not talking just about human experience, but also actually and literally human, the body and the brain. He believes strongly that human evolution is now intrinsically connected and intertwined with that of technology's evolution, in particular digital technology. This is intriguing. It suggests that the world that you or I may be designing for, and the human being we may be designing for, may be evolving to something different than the biological norm, if there is such a thing. Really, he's asking, what does it mean to be human in the future? He looks at the idea of biological evolution being barely intelligent. Behind a lot of Kurzweil's work is the notion of intelligence. I already mentioned that a lot of his computer science research is in the area of artificial intelligence. So he looks at biological evolution as something that is moving incredibly slowly and says, if there's an intelligence here, it's pretty small. He then turns and looks at the evolution of digital technology, of the computer, and he says, geez, this is moving 10 million times faster. 10 million times. So, what does this mean for human evolution if we're directly intertwined with that of the digital? Well, it means that our evolution is going to speed way up. Now, this is where he gets into a variety of theories that are very controversial, because what he's looking at is the idea that things will move so quickly that down the line, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we will no longer be able to predict what is possible. We won't be able to predict when machines can duplicate human intelligence and even human consciousness. This is the topic of Kurzweil's most famous book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. About half the book is an overview of artificial intelligence, and the other half is really a delineating of this theory of the speed up of human evolution. This book has been widely read. It's been translated into probably 40 or 50 languages, and it has a lot of followers, including apparently now Google. Another concept that Kurzweil focuses on is that of the singularity. It is the topic of another very famous book that he has written called The Singularity is Near. What is this idea of the singularity? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The singularity is the point at which a greater than human intelligence emerges. This is based pretty heavily on the idea of the digital augmenting or amplifying human intelligence and either combining with it to form the singularity or moving beyond it. The idea of the singularity was not invented by Kurzweil. In fact, it's generally accredited to the science fiction writer Vernor Vinge, a computer scientist in his own right, retired now, but worked his career in the University of California system. Vinge believed that the singularity would occur sometime around the year 2030. As you can see from the dates that Kurzweil mentioned in his video that you just saw, he's not quite that optimistic. He believes this will occur in about the year 2045. Well, either way, these guys are talking about some pretty extreme happenings. Along with the singularity comes the notion of an intelligence explosion. If we can't predict where digital technology is going 10 years or 15 years out, what happens when intelligence is so acute, so far beyond where ours is now, that we don't understand where it's going? A lot of people who talk about the singularity see it coming hand in hand with this notion of an intelligence explosion. I suppose it's a natural progression from a lot of Kurzweil's thought that he would be looking at the idea of using the digital technology that he talks so much about to allow humans to live forever. This is in fact the title of another well-known book he has written called Living Long Enough to Live Forever. I need to make it clear that many people disagree with Ray Kurzweil. This is one of the very interesting things about Google naming him Director of Engineering. It is important that as you read Kurzweil, you realize that there's a very active debate. There are entire books that have been written countering his arguments. In fact, this is probably one of the central arguments to the whole notion of where 21st century science is going. If we buy into the idea of a singularity, if we buy into the idea of an intelligence explosion as early as 20 to 30 years down the line, doesn't that pretty drastically change the nature of, on one hand, what we would have at our disposal to undertake research, but on the other hand, what we as creatives, as researchers, writers, artists, designers are designing for? Many of you have heard of the new media artist Zach Lieberman. Zach was a graduate of the Design and Technology program here at Parsons and taught at the program for many years. He's actually still in the city. He has founded his own school, the School for Poetic Computation. Years ago, when I used to lecture about Kurzweil, Zach was one of the opponents. Not literally, we weren't arguing with each other, but he used to note, and I think he probably still would, that he didn't agree with this whole idea of artificial intelligence. That he saw it as a pipe dream. He didn't think that was what he was doing. I want to play a video for you now that Zach made a couple of years ago. It's actually a music video using open frameworks for the singer Belle.
Little chase and no face, and no pain, and no. Oh, little chase and no face, Promise us that you'll stay, and we'll throw a party like each day was your birthday. Promise us that you'll stay, And all the other guys, they say the eyes are the window to the soul. But all the other guys are not a lion like I am. Give me the simple life. Give me the simple life. Give me an hour, and I'm staring down. I am a lion. Don't make me sound in my roar. Give me an hour, and I will stare him down. I am a lion. I am a lion. Little
The reason I played this for you is, well, first, it's quite beautiful, and it's always worth playing nice things. But second, I think it begs this question of artificial intelligence. I would argue that there are things coming out of the computing we are working with today that have within them bits and pieces of what Ray Kurzweil is describing as artificial intelligence. It's fascinating to look at one of these pieces, the Bell video for example, and take note of what the computers are actually doing. The computer vision, the pattern recognition, the spatial definition. It's incredible. If you had showed this video to an artificial intelligence researcher 20 years ago, they would probably have told you it was impossible. Herein is the point, and in a sense, I think, a backup for what Kurzweil is saying. We can't predict how quickly this stuff is changing. And when we begin to work on it, when you have people with great skill and vision like Zach Lieberman, putting together the tools and applying them, it's interesting to note how quickly things may become intelligent. Is open frameworks a good example of consciousness? Of course not. But I think things are moving far more rapidly than we often give them credit for. I've shot sections from every other area of my house. Why not the bathtub? Don't worry, I won't do anything crazy, and I am wearing clothes. So we were talking about Kurzweil and Google, which of course produces a natural segue to one of the other readings, both that I've given out in brief, but that I believe is part of the broader syllabus for the course, and that's the new book by Eric Schmidt and Jared Cohen, The New Digital Age. I'm not going to speak extensively about this book, but it is definitely worth reading. Google is a very controversial company. It hasn't always been, but as they've gotten bigger, they've probably suffered as all behemoths are created. And they've also been in the middle of a number of very controversial issues, not the least of which the Snowden issue that I mentioned at the start of this lecture. In any case, what Schmidt and Cohen are focusing on in this book is the idea of connectivity. Connectivity, in their view, will become a totality very soon. We can sit and argue about whether everyone will have data access, internet access, whether they will have smartphones that are capable of processing such access. But I think that Schmidt and Cohen are really right on. In the chapter that I assigned, there's a brief discussion about this notion of connectivity and how it will drastically change what globalism means and really what it means to be in the world today. I urge you to read it. The other writing that I listed, and once again that I believe is part of the overall syllabus for the course, is The Third Industrial Revolution by Jeremy Rifkin. Rifkin is an economist of some note. He has worked primarily in the European Union, but within this book and several other books leading up to it, Rifkin really talks about a new world emerging. In a sense, the post-carbon world brought about by shifts in energy sources, the democratization of information, a changing business model, and one of my favorite, the arrival of 3D printing as both a quick prototyping mechanism, but also a vehicle by which ideas can be brought to market and even produced with much greater rapidity. There are many people writing about these issues right now. I want to end today with a brief interview of Jeremy Rifkin, mainly just to introduce him to you. He's worth reading. His ideas are well-founded. He is the author of many books, not just the Third Industrial Revolution. And with that, here's Mr. Rifkin, and thank you for your time.
Let me share a story with you. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her government to address the important question, how do we grow the German economy in the 21st century? When I got to Berlin, the first question I asked the Chancellor is, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy or the European Union economy, or for that matter, the global economy, in the last stages of an energy era? The great industrial revolution based on fossil fuels is now sunsetting. The price of oil, coal, gas, and other fossil fuels are becoming more expensive. The technologies based on those fossil fuels, like the internal combustion engine, are now exhausted. They have no more multiplier effect. And the entire civilization made out of fossil fuels is now on life support. This problem is compounded by climate change now. Real-time climate change is now affecting agriculture and infrastructure. The result is the price of oil and other goods and services are going up. Unemployment is continuing to rise. We're moving deeper into debt, and we have a civilization in the throes of a crisis. What do? We need a new economic vision for the world that's compelling. We need a new economic game plan for the world that's deliverable. We have to move off carbon-based fossil fuels in 30 years. And this new plan has to move as quickly in the developing nations as in the developed world. So we need to step back and ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur? That'll give us a roadmap. The great economic revolutions occur when two things come about. First, we change the way we organize energy. Now, we've had various energy regimes through history. New energy regimes make possible more complex civilizations. They allow us to bring more people together, differentiate skills, integrate them in larger social and economic units. But the complexity of new energy regimes then require new communication revolutions to manage them. It's when communication revolutions merge and converge with energy revolutions that we change economic history, we change society. For example, in the 19th century, we went from manual print presses to steam-powered presses. We could mass-produce printing material very cheaply. Then we introduced public schools in Europe and America, and we created a print-literate workforce with the communication skills to manage a very complex, steam-driven, coal-powered first industrial revolution. We couldn't have managed it with an illiterate workforce. In the 20th century, we had another convergence of communication and energy, a second industrial revolution. Centralized electricity, the telephone, and later radio and television became the communication media to manage a dispersed auto and oil era and a mass consumer society. Now, clearly, that second industrial revolution is on life support. Again, the energies are more expensive, the technologies are sunsetting, the infrastructure is collapsing. We are now, however, on the cusp of a new convergence of communication and energy, a third industrial revolution. The internet is a powerful new communication medium. And what's so interesting about the internet is it's very different than the communication I grew up on in the 20th century, top-down, centralized communication, one-to-many, television and radio. What's interesting about the internet is it's the way it's organized. It's distributed and collaborative. So today, 2.3 billion human beings can send their own video, audio, and text to each other at the same time, distributed and collaborative, with far more lateral power than all of the centralized television networks of the 20th century. This distributed collaborative internet revolution, this communication media, is just now beginning to merge in Europe with a new energy regime, distributed energy. And with distributed IT and internet technology managed distributed energy, we have a powerful third industrial revolution that could allow us to regrow the global economy, maintain a sustainable planet, and mitigate climate change. What are distributed energies? Well, let me compare them to elite energies. Coal, oil, natural gas, they're elite energies for the simple reason they're not found in our backyards. They're only found in a few places in the world, and they require huge military investments to secure them, huge geopolitical investments to manage them, and massive capital to organize them from the wellhead to the final user. So make no mistake about it, coal, oil, gas, the fossil fuels are the most expensive elite energies in history. They're now sunsetting. What are distributed energies? Distributed energies are energies that are found in our backyard. They're found in every square inch of the world. The sun shines all over this planet every day. The wind blows across the earth 24 hours a day. Underneath the ground, we have a hot geothermal core of energy ready to be converted to our uses. In the agricultural areas, we have agricultural waste and forestry waste that can be converted overnight to energy. If you live in the coastal areas, the ocean tides, the ocean waves are coming in every day, another source of energy. Wherever we have garbage, we can anaerobically convert it back to energy overnight. We have enough of these distributed energies to provide for our species until kingdom comes. The European Union has committed itself to a 5-pillar infrastructure to create a powerful new third industrial revolution that can transform Europe and hopefully the world. I was privileged to develop this plan for the European Union. It was endorsed by the European Parliament in 2007. This plan is now moving through the various agencies of the European Commission and in the member states. Pillar 1, the EU has committed itself to 20% renewable energy by 2020. That means a third of the electricity of Europe has to be green electricity by that time. Pillar 2, how do we collect distributed renewable energies? Buildings. We have 191 million buildings in the EU, homes, offices, and factories. The goal is to convert every one of these buildings to your own personal green micro power plant. So you can collect solar electricity on your roof with your solar panels, collect wind off the side of the walls for green electricity, take the geothermal heat underneath the building and convert it back to energy, take the garbage in the building and convert it back to energy. Turn every building into your own personal power plant. Pillar 3, we have to store these energies because they're intermittent. The sun isn't always shining. Sometimes the wind's blowing at night, you need the electricity during the day. So we're going to have to store these energies, and we're for all storage technologies, flywheels, batteries, capacitors, water pumping. But we put most of our emphasis on hydrogen as a storage medium to store this energy. Just like media is stored in digital, renewable energy is stored by hydrogen. So when the sun hits your roof, you collect a little electricity with your solar panel. If you have some surplus you're not using, you take that surplus electricity, put it in water. Hydrogen comes out of the water into a tank. When the sun isn't shining on your roof, convert that hydrogen right back to electricity. A small thermodynamic loss. That's pillar 3. Pillar 4 is where the communication revolution converges with the new energy revolution to create a third industrial revolution. We take off-the-shelf internet technology and we convert the entire electricity grid of Europe to an electricity internet that acts exactly like the internet. So when millions of buildings are collecting their own green electricity on site, storing it in hydrogen like we store media in digital, and then if you don't need some of that electricity during the day, your software can direct you to sell that electricity across an electricity internet from the Irish Sea to the doorsteps of Russia, just like we now create our own information and share it online. Pillar 5, plug-in transport. Electric vehicles are out this year. Fuel cell cars, trucks, and buses are out in 2014. We'll be able to plug in all of our vehicles anywhere on the grid where there's green electricity. There'll be power charging units on every street corner, and you'll be able to buy electricity from the grid when your car's parked, or even sell your own electricity back to the grid if the price is right. These 5 pillars together create a new mega technology platform. They are a high-tech, smart infrastructure for a third industrial revolution. This third industrial revolution is power to the people, the democratization of energy. The music industry didn't understand file sharing in music. When millions of young people began to create software to share music together, the music companies thought it was a joke. Then they became terrified. Then they went out of business. Similarly, the newspapers really didn't understand the blogosphere, the idea of millions of people sharing news and information together. Now the newspapers are either going out of business or they're creating their own blogs. As powerful as this internet revolution has been, this democratization of information, it's only half the story. When the internet communication revolution begins to converge with the new distributed energies, we have the second half of the story, a powerful third industrial revolution that's going to transform society. We are in the midst of a crisis. This crisis, however, creates an enormous opportunity. If we can begin to phase in this third industrial revolution, it'll allow us to mitigate climate change, replenish the planet, regrow our economy in a sustainable manner, and provide opportunity and hope for generations not yet here. This is our moment. We have no choice. We have to mobilize our full talents and resources to this task at hand. We have to move off a carbon-based economy. We have to usher in a third industrial revolution. We have to share energy across this planet. We have to have power to the people.